In these 2.5 centuries, the European Middle Ages are engulfed by a melee of incessant war, disease, and heresy. Lepers shake their wooden clappers, priests scream hellfire from the pulpit. Columns of the righteous march through the open countryside, backs bleeding from self-flagellation. Pestilence ravages millions. States are born and die, and yet, from this endless turmoil, the foundations are laid for Renaissance and Reformation. By the 1500s, the modern period is born. Both England and France enter the 16th century in something like their modern form. The demands of the 100 Years' War and the subsequent need for reliable tax revenue accelerate the concentration of power at state level, in institutions that replace the system of local and regional contract and custom, known as feudalism. By the war's end, England, having exhausted its claims to the throne of France, duly embarks on its own war of succession, the so-called War of the Roses, ending with the death of the hunchback usurper Richard III. Incidentally, the last English king to die in battle. And with him, the end of the English medieval period. The House of Valois in France, having survived its own civil war, a king who thought himself made of glass, and the rise of the rival Dukes of Burgundy, emerges from this period one of the foremost powers in Western Europe. So too the Grand Duchy of Moscow, who under Ivan the Great, the first Russian leader to call himself Tsar, a title self-consciously derived from the Latin word Caesar, begins to assert independence from the otherwise invincible Golden Horde, and claim preeminence over its East Slavic neighbours in Kiev, a pattern not unfamiliar to many today. Christianity enters yet another crisis during this period. The popes remain, as ever, dependent on the temporal power of their European neighbours. The subsequent politicking, compromises and corruption descend into farce during the so-called Papal Schism of 1378 to 1417, when the same College of Cardinals claimed to have elected rival popes. Although in fairness, some novelty was achieved with the election of Pope Urban VI, who subsequently arrests and tortures his own cardinals. Such scandal did not go unnoticed among the laity of the 15th century Europe. Indeed, these events might be placed among a series of similar calamities that rocked the faithful of the later Middle Ages, not least the emergence also of the Black Death in the 1340s that killed up to 2/3 of the population. Lepers, Jews, and God's wrath were blamed, and alongside the inevitable and vicious pogroms that followed, the Great Pestilence also saw the outbreak of acts of debauchery, self-flagellating cults most especially in Germany, the emergence and then brutal repression of peasant revolts around the continent, and, naturally, the examination of faith itself. Among the cultural elite, this latter development was nothing new. In this early period, there were those that might be said to anticipate the formal Protestant Reformation in the following century. Men like William of Ockham, who suggested that reason might be separated from faith, thus laying the groundwork for the 17th century scientific revolution to follow. Or Marsilius of Padua, who advocated for the Church to be subordinate to a secular state elected by the people. Ockham was excommunicated. Marsilius, remarkably, was not. Important also for the coming Reformation was the growth of religious mysticism during this period. Christian mysticism found that inner revelation was more important for salvation than adherence to the ritual or authority of the Church. But, of course, such a realization had many dangers, not least the temptation to use such newly acquired powers for evil. the response from the religious authorities was decisive. In 1486, a German cleric published the infamous Malleus Maleficarium, which, together with the papal bull of Pope Innocent III of 1484, provided explicit religious and practical justification for the hunting of those for whom such a temptation proved too great. Witches. In the ensuing 2 or so centuries, something like 100,000 people were tried for witchcraft, about 80% women, 20% men. About half of those tried were executed. In Spain and Portugal, a fervour of a different kind gripped the populace. The attempt to remove the infidel Almohad Caliphate from Iberian lands, the so-called Reconquista, had stalled due to political and social disunity among the Christian monarchies. This changed in 1469 with the marriage of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. Spain became unified. Their most Catholic majesties overcame their own political weaknesses by persecuting their critics with the Holy Brotherhood, a kind of free-moving armed militia, and by unleashing the Holy Inquisition, headed by the genuinely sadistic Dominican monk Thomas de Torquemada. Torquemada tortured those accused of heresy and apostasy, blasphemers, homosexuals and sorcerers. The guilty were burned at the stake. In particular, he targeted Jews and Muslims. In fact, in 1492, more than 40,000 Jews were expelled from Spain after refusing to convert to Christianity, many being rescued and given sanctuary by the tolerant Ottoman Muslims. And when the final Muslim outpost in Granada was retaken that same year, a symbolic revenge for the Ottoman Turks having conquered Constantinople half a century before, standing witness was a certain Genovese sailor, Christopher Columbus. Columbus was on his way to solicit patronage from the Spanish monarchy for his proposed expedition to find a trade route to the East Indies. It was granted, and he returned later that year, having found not the famed riches of the East, but a new world. Thanks for listening. If you like this, subscribe and comment below.